Mother Bear was hanging from the bridge. What this human baby did put everyone in tears. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The morning air hung heavy with mist over Pinewood Village, a small settlement nestled between towering pines and the fierce Clearwater River. The wooden bridge that connected the village to the hunting grounds on the other side swayed gently in the breeze, its weathered planks creaking with each gust of wind. Lily Morgan, barely 11 months old, sat on a checkered blanket near the riverbank, her tiny fingers reaching for colorful pebbles while her parents, Sarah and Thomas, unpacked their picnic basket a few feet away. "Keep an eye on Lily," Sarah called to Thomas as she arranged the sandwiches on a plate. "She's been crawling faster these days." Thomas nodded, distracted by a group of villagers gathering at the edge of the bridge. Their urgent whispers carried on the wind, but he couldn't make out what had captured their attention. Lily babbled happily, oblivious to the growing commotion, her chubby hands clutching a small yellow wildflower she had plucked from beside the blanket. The peaceful morning shattered when a desperate roar echoed through the valley. The sound was primal, filled with fear and pain. Villagers gasped, pointing toward the middle of the bridge where a large brown bear hung precariously, her hind legs entangled in frayed ropes that had once reinforced the bridge's aging structure. The bear thrashed wildly, her powerful claws scraping against the wooden planks as she struggled to free herself. With each movement, the bridge shuddered dangerously, threatening to collapse under the strain. "It's the mother bear from the North Woods," whispered Connor Adams, the village blacksmith, his voice tight with concern. "She must have been crossing with her cub when the planks gave way." As if summoned by his words, a small bear cub appeared at the edge of the bridge, its round eyes wide with distress as it paced back and forth, occasionally rising on its hind legs to peer at its trapped mother. The cub's high-pitched wails pierced the air, a sound so full of desperation that several villagers stepped back, hands covering their mouths. "What should we do?" Haley Dawson, the schoolteacher, clutched her shawl tightly around her shoulders. "We can't just let her fall. The river is raging from last night's storm." Indeed, the Clearwater River below churned angrily, its waters swollen and dark, crashing against the rocks with enough force to shatter bone. The spray from the river misted the air around the bridge, dampening the bear's thick fur as she dangled helplessly, 40 feet above certain death. "Cut the ropes," suggested Jacob Bennett, a young hunter known for his reckless spirit. "That bear's been stealing livestock for months. Nature will take its course." Several villagers nodded in agreement, but others looked horrified at the suggestion. The mother bear roared again, this time a sound so filled with anguish that even Jacob flinched. The bear's eyes, wild with panic, kept darting to her cub, who continued to cry out for her. Sarah noticed the commotion and quickly gathered Lily into her arms. "Thomas, what's happening?" she called, hurrying to her husband's side. But as she reached him, she felt Lily squirming insistently in her arms, tiny hands reaching toward the bridge, toward the crying cub. "Bear," Lily said, one of her few words, pointing a chubby finger. "Bear cry." The simplicity of the child's observation silenced the arguing villagers. They watched as Lily struggled in her mother's arms, her innocent face creased with concern that seemed impossible for one so young. Sarah held her daughter tightly, but Lily's eyes remained fixed on the bear cub, as if she understood its distress in a way the adults could not. Meanwhile, the mother bear's strength was flagging. Her struggles grew weaker, her roars softer. The ropes cutting into her hind legs were fraying further with each movement, threads snapping one by one. The cub sensed its mother's fading energy, and its cries grew more frantic, drawing Lily's attention even more intensely. "Someone needs to do something," Thomas said, his voice breaking the tense silence. "We can't just watch her die." But fear kept the villagers rooted in place. The mother bear was known to be fierce, protective of her territory and her cub. Even in her vulnerable state, no one dared approach. The cub continued its heartbreaking cries, pacing at the edge of the bridge, occasionally taking a step forward only to retreat in fear as the structure swayed. Then, in a moment that would be retold in Pinewood Village for generations to come, Lily Morgan somehow slipped from her mother's grasp. Before anyone could react, the baby had crawled several feet toward the bridge, toward the wailing cub, the yellow wildflower still clutched in her tiny fist. "Lily!" Sarah screamed, lunging forward. But she froze when she saw what happened next. The bear cub, noticing the approaching baby, fell silent. Its round eyes, wet with what almost looked like tears, followed Lily's slow progress across the grass. The mother bear, sensing the change in her cub, twisted her massive head to see what had caused the sudden silence. Her eyes, previously wild with fear, fixed on the tiny human crawling toward her precious cub. The villagers held their breath. Time seemed to stop as baby and cub gazed at each other across the short distance that separated them, a distance that represented the vast gulf between the wild and the civilized, between fear and trust. Lily continued her determined crawl, babbling softly as if to comfort the frightened cub. "Don't move," Connor whispered to Sarah and Thomas, who were paralyzed with fear. Any sudden movement might frighten the bears. The world around them faded into silence. Even the river seemed to quiet its rage as Lily Morgan, not yet a year old, reached the spot where the bear cub trembled. With a gentleness that brought tears to the watching villagers' eyes, Lily extended her tiny hand, offering the yellow wildflower to the cub. For one breathless moment, no one dared move or speak. The fate of both the child and the bears hung in the balance, as precarious as the mother bear suspended above the raging waters. The cub sniffed cautiously at the offered flower, its small black nose twitching with curiosity. Then, as the first golden rays of sunlight broke through the morning mist, the bear cub leaned forward and gently, ever so gently, took the flower from Lily's outstretched hand. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The mother bear had stopped struggling, her dark eyes fixed intently on her cub and the human baby. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife as everyone waited for what would happen next. Sarah took a hesitant step forward, desperate to snatch her child away from the wild animal. But Thomas gripped her arm. "Wait," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Look." The bear cub, still clutching the yellow flower in its mouth, took a tentative step toward Lily. The baby girl giggled, the innocent sound carrying across the hushed riverside. She reached out again, her tiny palm open, not in offering, but in greeting. The cub sniffed her hand, then made a soft whimpering sound that seemed almost like purring. "I've never seen anything like it," Connor murmured in awe. "It's like they understand each other." Emboldened by this unexpected turn of events, Avery Johnson, the village doctor, stepped forward from the crowd. A woman of science and compassion, she'd been watching the scene unfold with growing concern for both the bears and the child. "The mother bear won't last much longer," she said, pointing to where the ropes were visibly fraying. "And if she falls, the cub will be orphaned, if it doesn't try to follow her into the river." Michael Hayes, the village carpenter who had helped build the bridge years ago, nodded grimly. "Those ropes weren't meant to hold such weight. We've got minutes, not hours." The growing connection between Lily and the cub had shifted something in the atmosphere. Where there had been fear and hesitation, there was now a tentative resolve. Even Jacob Bennet, who had suggested letting nature take its course, looked uncomfortable with the idea of the cub losing its mother while the baby watched. "I know that old bridge better than anyone," Michael said, running a hand through his gray-streaked hair. "If we can stabilize those planks and get someone out there with a knife—" "That's suicide," interrupted Savannah Reed, the owner of the village general store. "The bear will tear apart anyone who comes near her." "Maybe not," Connor said thoughtfully, his eyes fixed on the strange tableau of baby and cub. "Look how calm she's gotten watching her cub with the child. It's like she knows we're not a threat anymore." As if to confirm his words, the mother bear had indeed grown still, her massive body hanging limply in the tangled ropes, conserving her strength. Her eyes, intelligent and wary, moved from her cub to the humans and back again, as if assessing this unexpected situation. Lily, oblivious to the danger and the enormity of what was happening, sat down on the grass and patted the spot beside her, babbling to the cub as if inviting it to play. To everyone's amazement, the cub cautiously settled next to her, the wildflower now on the ground between them. "If we're going to help, it has to be now," Avery insisted, "before the ropes give way completely." Michael nodded and began removing his heavy boots. "I'll go. I built this bridge. I know which planks will hold and which won't." "I'm coming too," Connor said, already grabbing coils of fresh rope from his cart nearby. "You'll need someone to help secure new lines." Sarah and Thomas had edged closer to Lily, but were careful not to make any sudden movements that might startle the cub. The mother bear watched them approach with obvious tension, a low growl building in her throat. "Talk to her," Avery suggested to Sarah. "Let her hear your voice. She needs to know you're not going to harm her baby." Sarah swallowed hard, then began speaking in a soft, soothing tone. "It's all right," she said, addressing the bear directly. "We're going to help you. No one's going to hurt your little one." The words sounded absurd, talking to a wild bear as if it could understand. But the mother bear's growl subsided slightly. Meanwhile, Michael and Connor had carefully started making their way onto the bridge, moving slowly to avoid any sudden creaking or swaying. The structure groaned under their weight, causing the hanging bear to rumble nervously. "Steady now," Michael murmured, both to Connor and perhaps to the bear herself. They inched forward, the distance between them and the trapped animal shrinking foot by foot. Just as they were within 15 feet of the bear, a sharp crack split the air. One of the main support beams of the bridge had begun to splinter under the combined weight. "It's giving way!" someone shouted from the shore. The sudden noise and movement caused the mother bear to panic once more. She thrashed wildly, her powerful forelegs swinging dangerously close to where Michael and Connor were balanced on the narrow bridge. Her desperate roars echoed across the water. On the river bank, the bear cub jumped up in alarm, its eyes wide with renewed fear. It took several steps toward the bridge, clearly preparing to run to its mother despite the danger. "No!" Sarah cried out, not to the cub but to her own child, who had also risen to her feet, standing unsteadily for one of the first times in her young life. Lily Morgan, 11 months old and seemingly fearless, reached out and placed her small hand on the cub's furry back, as if to hold it back from danger. The cub froze at her touch. What happened next would forever change how the people of Pinewood Village viewed the boundary between humans and wild creatures. Lily began to sing, or rather, to make a singing sound, a melodious babble that rose and fell like a lullaby. The sound carried across the riverside and out to the bridge, where the mother bear's frantic movements began to slow once more. Then, with perfect clarity amid her baby babble, Lily spoke. "Safe. Bear safe." The mother bear stilled completely, her eyes locking with Lily's across the distance. Something passed between them, some silent communication that transcended species and language. The massive animal relaxed visibly, allowing Michael and Connor to approach at last. But nature had its own timeline. As the men reached the spot where the bear hung suspended, another sharp crack rang out from the bridge's support beams. The section of planking beneath them lurched dangerously. "We don't have time to free her properly," Michael said urgently. "Connor, get back to solid ground. I'll cut her loose." "But the fall could kill her," Connor protested. "She'll die for certain if the whole bridge collapses with us on it," Michael countered, already pulling a hunting knife from his belt. The mother bear seemed to sense their intentions. Rather than fighting, she remained eerily still as Michael carefully approached the tangled ropes. With experienced hands, he began sawing through the thick fibers, all while murmuring reassurances to the massive predator inches from his face. "Almost there, old girl. Just stay calm a little longer." On shore, the villagers had gathered closer, their previous fear replaced by collective hope. Even Jacob Bennett had waded into the shallows, ready to help if the bear survived the fall into the raging waters. The tension mounted as the last rope began to fray under Michael's blade. Connor had retreated to safer planking but remained close enough to help if needed. The mother bear's eyes never left the shore where her cub sat beside the standing baby girl, the two small figures somehow drawing strength from each other. "Hold on," Michael said, his voice tight with concentration. "Just a few more—" The final rope snapped with a whip-like crack. For a horrifying moment, the mother bear hung suspended in air, her massive body silhouetted against the misty sky. Then she plummeted toward the churning river below, her roar of fear drowned out by the rushing waters. "No!" The collective cry rose from the shore as the bear disappeared beneath the foaming surface. The cub let out a heart-wrenching wail and bolted toward the river's edge. Without thinking, Sarah rushed forward and scooped up both Lily and the squirming cub, holding them back from the dangerous current. Surprisingly, the cub did not bite or scratch, but clung to Sarah's arm, trembling violently as it stared at the spot where its mother had vanished. Seconds ticked by, with no sign of the bear. The river churned relentlessly, white water crashing over submerged rocks. Hope began to fade from the villagers' faces. Then, 50 yards downstream, a dark shape broke the surface of the water. The mother bear's head appeared, then her massive shoulders as she fought against the current, powerful legs paddling desperately. "There she is!" Haley shouted, pointing. "She's swimming!" Indeed, the bear had managed to orient herself in the rushing water and was now making steady progress toward the shore. Jacob and 3 other men waded deeper into the shallows, forming a human chain to help guide the exhausted animal to safety if she came within reach. The bear's strength was clearly fading, but with each powerful stroke, she drew closer to the shore, closer to her cub. The villagers cheered her on, all previous fears forgotten in the drama of the moment. With one final surge of strength, the mother bear reached the shallows where she could touch bottom. She dragged herself onto the rocky shore, water streaming from her sodden fur. She collapsed on the pebbled bank, sides heaving with exhaustion, but alive. The cub wriggled free from Sarah's arms and bounded toward its mother, making sounds of distress and joy. The villagers backed away, giving the bears space for their reunion, but Lily struggled against her mother's protective grip. "Bear!" she insisted, pointing. "Help, Bear!" Avery stepped forward cautiously, her medical bag in hand. The ropes may have caused injuries, she explained to the wary parents. If she'll let me near her, I might be able to help. The idea seemed ludicrous, approaching an injured wild bear with a human child. But something extraordinary had happened that morning, something that defied conventional wisdom about wild animals. The mother bear raised her head weakly as they approached, her eyes following Lily's movements. "Let me try something," Avery said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a jar of honey, a remedy she often used for children's coughs, and handed it to Thomas. "Bears love honey. Maybe this will help her trust us enough to let me check her wounds." Thomas took the jar with trembling hands. "Are you sure about this?" he whispered, eyeing the enormous bear that, despite her exhausted state, could easily kill a human with one swipe of her massive paw. "No," Avery admitted. "But look at your daughter." Lily was still reaching toward the bears, her tiny face alight with determination that seemed impossible for an infant. The mother bear and her cub were watching the child with what could only be described as curiosity rather than aggression. Taking a deep breath, Thomas uncapped the honey jar and took a cautious step forward. Sarah clutched Lily tighter, torn between fear for her husband and a strange, growing certainty that something miraculous was happening. "Easy now," Thomas murmured, kneeling several feet from the injured bear. He set the open jar on the ground and pushed it forward with a stick, then retreated a few steps. The mother bear sniffed the air, the scent of honey briefly overpowering her pain and exhaustion. She dragged herself forward slightly, inspecting the offering while keeping herself positioned between the humans and her cub. While the bear was distracted by the honey, Avery moved slowly to one side, trying to get a better look at the injuries on the bear's hind legs. Red welts were visible where the ropes had cut into flesh, but nothing appeared to be broken, a miracle considering the fall. "I need to clean those wounds," Avery said softly. "Otherwise they could become infected." As if understanding her words, the mother bear looked up from the honey jar and directly into Avery's eyes. The doctor froze, caught in that ancient gaze. Then, to everyone's amazement, the bear lowered her head once more to the honey, exposing her injured flank. I think she's letting you approach," Connor said in disbelief. Meanwhile, an unexpected complication emerged from the gathered crowd. Logan Carter, a trapper who had lost valuable furs to bears in the past, had been watching the scene with growing displeasure. Unlike the other villagers who had been moved by the unfolding drama, Logan saw only an opportunity slipping away. "This is ridiculous," he growled, pushing his way to the front. "That's a wild predator, not some pet to be coddled. While you're all distracted by this foolishness, I'm going to get my rifle." His words sent a chill through the gathering. Several villagers moved to block his path, including Jacob Bennett, who had initially suggested letting the bear fall. "Stand aside," Logan demanded. "That bear has been raiding traps all spring. Its pelt alone is worth more than most of you make in a month." "You're not shooting that bear," Jacob said firmly, surprising himself as much as Logan. "Not today. Not after what we just witnessed." Logan's face darkened with anger. "Since when do you care about bears, Bennett? You're a hunter same as me." "Maybe I'm learning there's a difference between hunting for need and killing for greed," Jacob replied, standing his ground. While this confrontation brewed, Avery had carefully approached the injured bear, medical bag in hand. Her movements were slow and deliberate, her voice a constant, soothing murmur. "That's it, Mama. Just focus on your honey. I'm going to help those sore legs feel better." The mother bear continued eating the honey, her body stiff with watchfulness but not aggression. Her cub had settled beside her, occasionally glancing at Lily, who was still watching intently from her mother's arms. With extraordinary courage, Avery knelt beside the massive predator and began gently cleaning the rope burns with antiseptic. The mother bear rumbled low in her throat at the stinging sensation but made no move to attack. "This is unbelievable," Michael whispered from where he and Connor had rejoined the group after making their way off the damaged bridge. "I've lived in these woods my entire life and never seen a wild bear tolerate human touch like this." Logan, seeing that he was outnumbered by the suddenly bear-friendly villagers, spat on the ground in disgust. "You'll regret this when that same bear is killing your livestock come winter." He turned on his heel and stalked away, but his retreating words carried an unmistakable threat. "This isn't over." The confrontation had created a momentary distraction. When attention returned to the riverside scene, gasps of amazement rippled through the crowd. Sarah had cautiously set Lily down on the pebbled shore, and the toddler had wobbled over to sit directly beside the bear cub. The mother bear was watching but made no move to separate them as Lily gently patted the cub's head. "Don't move," Thomas breathed, frozen in place, as his baby daughter interacted with the wild animals that could end her life in seconds. Avery continued her treatment, now applying a healing salve to the bear's wounds. "The cut on her right hind leg is deep," she reported quietly. "But bears are resilient creatures. If infection doesn't set in, she should recover." The mother bear suddenly raised her massive head, nostrils flaring. Something had caught her attention. Her muscles tensed, and the villagers held their breath, wondering if the spell of peace was about to break. But the bear wasn't looking at them. Her gaze was directed toward the tree line at the far side of the bridge, where 3 more men had emerged, rifles raised. Logan Carter had returned with reinforcements. Trappers from the next valley who had no connection to what had transpired that morning. "Get away from that bear," Logan shouted across the river. "We're taking it down." "No!" Several voices cried out at once. Thomas lunged forward to grab Lily, but in his haste he slipped on the wet rocks, falling heavily. The sudden movement startled the mother bear, who rose to her feet with a surprising speed despite her injuries. For one terrible moment, it seemed as though the fragile trust that had been built was shattered. The mother bear stood over her cub and Lily, her massive form casting a shadow over the tiny figures. A collective breath was held as the bear looked down at the human child within reach of her deadly claws. Then, in a gesture that would be recounted in Pinewood Village for generations, the mother bear gently nudged Lily with her nose, pushing the baby toward Sarah, who was frozen in horror a few feet away. It was as if the bear was returning the child to her mother. The crack of a rifle split the air. A bullet kicked up dirt mere inches from the bear's paw. The mother bear roared in alarm, scooping up her cub by the scruff of its neck. But instead of charging the humans nearby, she turned and lumbered toward the forest on the village side of the river, away from the armed trappers. "After it!" Logan yelled, and the trappers began making their way onto the damaged bridge, intent on pursuing their quarry. "The bridge won't hold them!" Michael shouted in warning, but his voice was drowned out by another ominous crack as more support beams began to give way. The villagers watched in helpless horror as the section of bridge beneath the trappers' feet suddenly collapsed. The men's shouts turned to screams as they plunged toward the raging river below. Logan, who had been slightly behind the others, clung desperately to the remaining section of bridge, his legs dangling over the churning waters. "Help!" he cried, his earlier bravado replaced by naked fear. "I can't hold on." Without hesitation, Connor and Michael rushed toward the bridge, but it was clear they wouldn't reach him in time. Logan's grip was already slipping, his face contorted with the effort of holding his own weight. Then, from the tree line emerged the mother bear. She paused at the edge of the broken bridge, her cub safely hidden in the underbrush behind her. For a long moment she stared at the human who had just tried to kill her, now hanging helplessly above the same waters that had nearly claimed her life. "She's going to watch him fall," Jacob said grimly. "Can't say I blame her." But the mother bear did something no one expected. She moved onto the remaining section of bridge, her weight causing the entire structure to groan ominously. With deliberate steps, she approached the struggling man. "Get back!" Logan screamed, terror making his voice shrill. "Someone shoot it!" No one moved to help him. They watched, transfixed, as the bear reached Logan's hanging form. She could have easily swiped at him, sending him plummeting to his death. Instead, she lowered her massive head and clamped her jaws around the back of his jacket, much as she had carried her cub. With strength that defied her recent ordeal, the mother bear began backing up, dragging Logan's flailing form to safety 1 inch at a time. The remaining bridge planks protested under their combined weight, threatening to give way at any moment. "She's saving him?" Haley whispered in disbelief. Indeed, the bear continued her rescue until Logan was back on solid ground. The moment she released his jacket, Logan scrambled away from her, his face ashen with shock. The mother bear regarded him for one long moment, then turned and disappeared into the forest where her cub waited. A profound silence fell over the gathered villagers as they tried to process what they had just witnessed. Avery was the first to speak, her voice filled with wonder. "She understood," the doctor said simply. Somehow, she understood mercy. Sarah clutched Lily to her chest, tears streaming down her face. The baby was reaching toward the forest where the bears had vanished, babbling happily as if saying goodbye to newfound friends. Thomas put his arm around his family, his voice thick with emotion. "What happened here today? It's not something I can explain." Connor nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe it doesn't need explaining. Maybe we just need to remember it." As the villagers began to disperse, forever changed by what they had witnessed, Logan Carter remained seated on the ground where the bear had left him. His hands were shaking, his face still pale with shock. Jacob Bennett approached him cautiously. "You all right?" Logan looked up, his eyes haunted. "That bear, it should have let me fall. I would have shot it without a second thought." "But it didn't let you fall," Jacob said, offering his hand to help the trapper to his feet. "Maybe that's something worth thinking about." Across the riverside clearing, Lily Morgan suddenly spoke again, her childish voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air. "Bear good," she said, pointing to the forest. "Bear friend." The simple words brought fresh tears to many eyes. Something profound had shifted in Pinewood Village that day, not just in how they viewed the wild creatures that shared their forest, but in how they understood connection, compassion, and the boundaries between different worlds. As sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah and Thomas prepared to take their exhausted daughter home. Lily had fallen asleep in her mother's arms, her tiny hand still clutching the yellow wildflower the bear cub had returned to her before disappearing into the forest. "Do you think we'll see them again?" Sarah asked softly, looking toward the tree line where occasional rustling suggested the bears might still be watching. Thomas followed her gaze, a small smile playing on his lips. "I have a feeling this is just the beginning of something extraordinary." In the deepening shadows of the forest, 2 pairs of eyes reflected the last rays of sunlight. The mother bear standing guard while her cub slept peacefully beside her. Both creatures somehow changed by their encounter with the tiny human who had bridged the ancient divide between their worlds with nothing more than innocence and a wildflower. The night fell gently over Pinewood Village, but the story of what had transpired that day was just beginning to spread, carried by whispers of wonder and the enduring power of unexpected compassion. As dawn broke the following morning, the village was abuzz with talk of the miraculous events. Those who had witnessed it firsthand recounted the tale to those who hadn't, each telling adding a layer of reverence to the extraordinary connection between a human baby and a wild bear. Children listened wide-eyed as their parents described how little Lily Morgan had somehow communicated with the creatures in a way no adult could understand, but not everyone was convinced. Ethan Marshall, the village elder whose weathered face bore the scars of a lifetime in the wilderness, shook his head as he listened to the excited chatter in the village square. "Bears are bears," he insisted, thumping his walking stick for emphasis. "Wild creatures follow wild instincts. What you all saw was nothing more than a mother protecting her young, same as any creature would." "You weren't there, Ethan," Connor argued gently. "There was something more happening. Something I can't explain, but I know what I saw." "Superstitious nonsense," Ethan scoffed. "Next thing, you'll be telling tales of the bears coming to tea." As if summoned by his mockery, a commotion erupted at the edge of the village. A young boy came running, his face flushed with excitement. "The bears!" he shouted breathlessly. "They're back, at the Morgan place." The news spread like wildfire. Within minutes, a crowd had gathered and was making its way toward the small cottage where Sarah and Thomas lived with baby Lily. They approached cautiously, uncertain what they might find. Sarah stood in the doorway of her home, her face a mixture of wonder and concern. "They arrived at dawn," she explained to the gathering crowd, her voice hushed. "The mother bear just sat there at the edge of our garden, watching the house. We didn't know what to do." "Where are they now?" Avery asked, medical bag already in hand, concerned about the bear's injuries from the day before. Sarah pointed toward their small vegetable garden. "Thomas is with them." The crowd moved as one, rounding the corner of the cottage to find a scene that defied belief. Thomas Morgan sat on a wooden stump at the edge of the garden, baby Lily on his lap. 10 feet away, the mother bear reclined in the morning sunlight, her wounds from yesterday visible, but already looking less angry. The bear cub frolicked nearby, playfully pouncing on butterflies that flitted among the cabbages. "She won't come closer," Thomas explained, without taking his eyes off the massive predator. "But she won't leave either. It's like she's keeping watch." Ethan Marshall pushed his way to the front of the crowd, his skeptical expression faltering at the sight before him. "This isn't natural," he muttered, but with less conviction than before. "What do they want?" someone whispered from the back of the group. As if in answer, the mother bear rose slowly to her feet. Several villagers stepped back instinctively, but the animal made no threatening moves. Instead, she turned and nudged her playing cub with her nose, directing it back toward the forest edge. The cub resisted for a moment, looking toward baby Lily with what seemed like reluctance, but eventually obeyed its mother. Before following her offspring, the mother bear did something that sent murmurs rippling through the watching crowd. She raised her massive head, looked directly at baby Lily and made a soft chuffing sound, almost like a farewell, before turning and disappearing into the trees, her cub bounding ahead of her. "Well, I'll be," Ethan said softly, his lifetime of wilderness experience insufficient to explain what he'd just witnessed. The bear's visit became the first of many unusual events that unfolded in Pinewood Village over the following weeks. The bridge was repaired, this time with stronger materials, donated by neighboring settlements who had heard the remarkable tale. Logan Carter, forever changed by his encounter with the bear that had saved his life despite his intentions to kill her, abandoned trapping altogether, and became one of the most vocal advocates for protecting the forest and its inhabitants. 3 weeks after the incident at the bridge, another startling development occurred. Sarah was hanging laundry while Lily played in a small enclosure Thomas had built in their yard. A shadow fell across the grass, causing Sarah to look up with a gasp. The mother bear stood at the edge of the property, but this time she was not alone, nor was she accompanied only by her cub. Behind her, cautiously emerging from the underbrush, came another bear, this one with a visible limp and patches of fur missing from what appeared to be old wounds. "Thomas!" Sarah called softly, not wanting to startle the bears. "Thomas, come see." Her husband emerged from their cottage, immediately freezing at the sight of not one, but 2 adult bears near their home. "Get Lily inside," he said urgently. But before Sarah could reach their daughter, the injured newcomer bear made a pitiful moaning sound. It was then that they noticed the creature's paw was badly swollen, with something metallic glinting in the flesh. "It's a trap," Thomas realized aloud. "That bear's caught in a hunter's trap." Despite having been freed from most trappers since Logan's change of heart, the forests still contained old devices set and forgotten years ago. This bear had apparently stumbled into one such relic and had been suffering ever since. What happened next challenged everything the villagers thought they knew about wild animals. The mother bear they had come to recognize approached the edge of the yard, looking directly at the cottage before making that same chuffing sound they had heard before. She then turned to the injured bear, nudging it forward slightly, as if bringing it for help. "She brought it here," Avery said in wonder, having arrived to check on Lily and witness the scene unfolding. "She's brought an injured member of her kind to the humans who helped her." Word spread quickly, and soon half the village had gathered at a respectful distance. Among them was Ethan Marshall, his skepticism now giving way to genuine astonishment. "In 60 years in these mountains," he said quietly, "I've never seen bears behave this way. It's as if they've decided we're allies, not enemies." After much careful planning, Avery and Connor managed to sedate the injured bear using honey mixed with herbs known for their calming properties. With the animal unconscious, they removed the rusted trap from its paw, cleaned the wound, and applied healing salves. Throughout the procedure, the mother bear watched from the forest edge, her cub beside her, seemingly understanding that these humans were helping, not harming. As summer progressed into autumn, more remarkable interactions occurred. The bears would appear periodically at the edge of the village, sometimes bringing injured forest creatures: a fox with a broken leg, a young deer with a deep cut on its flank. Each time they would wait patiently while Avery or other villagers provided what care they could before retreating back into their wild domain. The most extraordinary change, however, was in baby Lily herself. Now approaching her first birthday, she was talking more. Simple words that somehow always seemed to coincide with the bear's visits. "Bear, come," she would say, hours before the creatures appeared, as if she sensed their approach. "Bear hurt," she announced once, pointing to the forest. And sure enough, the mother bear arrived the next morning with a fresh gash on her shoulder that needed treatment. "How does she know?" Sarah asked Avery during one such visit, watching as her daughter babbled happily in what almost seemed like conversation with the bear cub, now significantly grown. Avery shook her head, medical knowledge insufficient to explain the connection. "Some bonds transcend our understanding," she said simply. "Lily reached out to that cub when both were frightened, offered comfort when it was needed most. Perhaps that created something special." The fame of Pinewood Village and its bear whisperer baby spread far beyond the surrounding valleys. Visitors began arriving from distant towns, hoping to witness the miracle for themselves. Most left disappointed. as the bears seemed to sense the presence of strangers and would remain hidden during such times. But for the villagers who had witnessed that first miraculous day at the bridge, life had changed in profound ways. The forest was no longer merely a resource to be harvested or a wilderness to be feared. It had become a community of which they were a part, not apart from. They began to move more gently upon the earth, taking only what was needed, replacing what they could. Logan Carter, once the most ruthless trapper in the region, became the forest's fiercest protector. He used his knowledge of hunting to thwart poachers who came seeking the now famous bears, and spent his days teaching the village children about respecting the wild creatures who shared their world. The bears chose mercy when they could have chosen vengeance, he would tell them, his voice growing soft when he recounted how the mother bear had saved him from certain death. That's a lesson some humans never learn. As winter approached, the bears' visits grew less frequent as they prepared for hibernation. On the first snow of the season, the mother bear and her now nearly grown cub made one final appearance at the edge of the Morgan property. Lily, now able to walk confidently on her own, toddled to the fence under her parents' watchful eyes. "Bears sleep," she said matter-of-factly, waving a tiny hand. The mother bear made her familiar chuffing sound, then raised herself onto her hind legs, not in aggression, but almost like a farewell gesture. The cub, mimicking its mother, did the same. For a moment, they stood like furry sentinels against the backdrop of snow-covered pines, their breath visible in the cold air. Thomas wrapped an arm around Sarah as they watched this final exchange. "Do you think they'll come back after winter?" Sarah nodded, certainty warming her voice despite the cold. "Some connections can't be broken by time or season. They'll return." As if confirming her words, the mother bear lowered herself to all fours, gave one last look at the human child who had changed so much with a simple act of compassion, then turned and lumbered into the forest depths, her cub following close behind. That night, as Lily slept peacefully in her crib, clutching a small wooden bear Thomas had carved for her, the first great storm of winter descended upon Pinewood Village. Wind howled around the eaves of cottages, and snow piled deep against doors and windows. The villagers huddled in their homes, grateful for warm here hearths, and the knowledge that their unusual guardians were safely denned for the long, cold months ahead. No one anticipated the disaster that would strike before dawn. The snow turned to freezing rain in the darkest hours, coating every surface with treacherous ice. As the temperature plummeted further, the weight of ice on the village's oldest trees became too much to bear. A massive pine that had stood sentinel at the edge of the village for over a century finally surrendered to gravity's pull. With a crack like thunder, it toppled directly onto the Morgan family's cottage. Thomas awoke to the sound of splintering wood and Sarah's terrified scream. The roof had partially collapsed, snow and freezing rain pouring into their home. By some miracle, the main beam had fallen at an angle, creating a small pocket of safety around their bed. "Lily," Sarah cried, struggling to free herself from the blankets now pinned under debris. Thomas was already moving, scrambling toward their daughter's crib in the corner of the room. Horror froze his blood when he reached it. The crib was crushed beneath a massive branch, splintered wood where his baby daughter should be. "She's not here," he shouted, voice breaking as he frantically tore through the debris. "She's gone." Sarah's wail of anguish cut through the howling wind. She fought her way free of the debris and joined Thomas in desperately searching the ruins of their home. The cottage groaned ominously around them, threatening further collapse at any moment. "We need to get out," Thomas said, pulling Sarah toward the door that was barely visible through the swirling snow that now filled half their home. The whole place could come down any second. "Not without Lily," Sarah fought against him, her motherly instinct overriding any concern for her own safety. A shout from outside penetrated the chaos. "Thomas, Sarah, can you hear me?" It was Michael Hayes, the carpenter who lived nearest to them. He had heard the crash and come running through the blizzard. "Michael, help us," Thomas called back. "Lily's missing." With Michael's assistance, they managed to force the jammed door open enough to squeeze through. Outside, the storm raged with unforgiving fury. The darkness was complete except for the lantern Michael had brought, its feeble light barely penetrating the wall of swirling white. "The baby, she's not in the house," Sarah sobbed, her nightgown already stiff with ice as she stood barefoot in the snow. "She must be out here somewhere." Other villagers were emerging from their homes now, alerted by the commotion. Connor arrived with extra lanterns, and soon a search party had formed despite the dangerous conditions. "Lily," Thomas called, his voice hoarse with fear and cold. "Lily, where are you?" The search expanded outward from the ruined cottage, but the storm made progress almost impossible. The cold was life-threatening. Even wrapped in the blankets neighbors had brought, Sarah's lips were turning blue. "We need to get her inside," Avery insisted, trying to lead Sarah toward her own home. "Not until we find my baby," Sarah said through chattering teeth, pulling away. A sudden sound cut through the wind, not a human voice but a deep, resonant growl that seemed to come from the forest edge. The searchers froze, lanterns raised. Was that? Connor didn't finish the question. The growl came again, louder this time, followed by a series of short huffs. The villagers exchanged bewildered glances. Bears should be hibernating in the depths of winter. Yet there was no mistaking that sound. "It's her," Thomas whispered, a wild hope kindling in his chest. "It's the mother bear." Without hesitation, he began struggling through the knee-deep snow toward the sound, Sarah close behind him despite Avery's protests. The other villagers followed, lanterns held high against the darkness. At the very edge of the forest, where the trees created a slight windbreak from the raging storm, they found an impossible sight. The mother bear stood like a dark mountain against the snow, fully awake despite the season. But it was what lay at her feet that stopped Thomas's heart. A small bundle of blankets, moving slightly. "Lily!" Sarah screamed, surging forward. The bear didn't retreat at their approach. Instead, she moved aside with deliberate care, revealing baby Lily, wrapped in her bedding and protected from the worst of the elements. The child was awake and, miraculously, not crying, simply looking up at the massive creature that had somehow saved her from the collapsing cottage. Thomas scooped his daughter into his arms, tears freezing on his cheeks as he confirmed she was unharmed. Sarah enveloped them both, sobbing with relief. "How?" Connor breathed, staring at the bear in disbelief. How did she know? Ethan Marshall, who had insisted on joining the search despite his age, shook his head in wonder. She must have sensed the danger somehow, woken from hibernation and come straight here. The mother bear watched the reunion with what seemed like satisfaction, her breath creating clouds of vapor in the freezing air. Then she made a soft chuffing sound, the same one they had come to recognize as her voice, and turned as if to leave. "Wait," Thomas called, still cradling Lily against his chest. "The storm, it's too dangerous." As if understanding his concern, the bear paused, looking back over her massive shoulder. Snow had accumulated on her thick fur, giving her an almost ghostly appearance in the lantern light. "Our home is destroyed," Sarah said, addressing the bear directly. But the village meeting hall has a large hearth. There's room for everyone, including you." The words should have sounded absurd. Inviting a wild bear to shelter with humans. Yet, after all that had happened, it seemed perfectly natural. The bear considered them for a long moment, then made another decision that defied all conventional understanding of wild animals. She turned back and followed the group of humans as they struggled through the storm toward the meeting hall at the center of the village. Word spread quickly, and by the time they reached the sturdy log building, most of Pinewood's residents had gathered inside. Faces registered shock, then wonder, as the great bear ducked her massive head to enter through the double doors, shaking snow from her fur like an enormous dog. The bear saved Lily from the collapsed cottage, Thomas explained to the astonished crowd, his voice breaking with emotion. She woke from hibernation somehow, knew our child was in danger. The meeting hall had been built to accommodate the entire village for gatherings and celebrations. Its high ceiling and large central space easily contained the unusual assembly. The massive stone hearth already blazed with a fire built up against the bitter cold, casting flickering light and welcome warmth throughout the room. The mother bear settled herself in a corner, seemingly content to be out of the storm. The villagers kept a respectful distance, but there was no fear in their eyes now, only gratitude and amazement. Avery immediately set about checking Lily for injuries or signs of cold exposure. "It's a miracle," she pronounced after her examination. "She's perfectly fine, warmer than she should be, considering the conditions out there." The doctor cast a wondering glance at the bear, almost as if the bear kept her warm, Sarah finished, still trembling with the aftermath of terror and relief. Logan Carter, who had been one of the first to join the search party, spoke up from where he stood near the doorway. "I've tracked bears for 20 years, he said, his voice low with disbelief. "They don't wake during deep winter without extreme provocation, and they certainly don't rescue human children. This one did," Thomas said simply, cradling his daughter close. As the storm raged on outside, an extraordinary scene unfolded within the meeting hall. The villagers of Pinewood, forced from their homes by the blizzard, shared their shelter with a creature that should have been their natural enemy. Children, who would normally have been kept far from a wild predator, sat on the floor not far from where the bear rested, watching her with curiosity rather than fear. Lily, once she had been wrapped in dry blankets and given warm milk, squirmed to be put down. Sarah hesitated, but Thomas nodded reassuringly. He set their daughter on her feet, staying close as she toddled directly toward the bear. The room fell silent. Breaths held as the tiny child approached the massive predator. The bear raised her head, dark eyes fixing on Lily as she came within touching distance. "Bear save," Lily said clearly, patting the creature's nose with the same fearlessness she had shown that first day at the bridge. "Thank you." The simplicity of the child's gratitude brought tears to many eyes. The bear made her familiar chuffing sound, then gently, ever so gently, touched her nose to Lily's forehead in what could only be described as a gesture of affection. Jacob Bennett, watching from nearby, cleared his throat gruffly to hide his emotion. "I think," he said quietly, "we are witnessing something none of us were meant to understand. Something sacred." As the night wore on, the villagers shared food and stories, the unusual circumstances creating a sense of community stronger than they had ever known. The bear remained in her corner, seemingly content to observe the humans as they slowly overcame their initial wariness and went about the business of waiting out the storm. But as dawn approached, bringing with it the storm's end, another drama was unfolding on the mountains high above Pinewood Village. A group of hunters from a distant settlement, having heard rumors of the miracle bears of Pinewood Valley, had set out days earlier with the intention of capturing such valuable specimens alive for a traveling exhibition. The storm had caught them on the mountain pass, forcing them to shelter in a cave until it passed. Now, led by a harsh-faced man named Silas Reed, they were descending toward the village, unaware that their quarry was currently sharing shelter with the very community they planned to deceive. "Remember," Silas instructed his 5 companions as they trudged through the fresh snow, "we say nothing about our true intentions. We're just travelers caught in the storm. Once we locate the bear's den, we'll set the traps and be gone before anyone realizes what's happened." The sun rose on a transformed landscape. The storm had blanketed Pinewood Valley in pristine white, tree branches hanging low under their burden of snow and ice. It was breathtakingly beautiful and dangerously cold. Inside the meeting hall, the villagers were stirring, preparing to assess the damage to their homes in the clear light of day. The mother bear, who had dozed but never fully slept during the night, was now alert, her head raised as if listening to something beyond human hearing. "What is it?" Thomas asked, noticing her sudden alertness. Over the months, he had come to read the bear's body language with surprising accuracy. The bear rose to her feet, prompting a flurry of movement as people made way for her. She padded to the door, then looked back at Thomas with what seemed like urgency. "I think she wants to leave," he said to the others. Michael Hayes, who had been preparing to lead a team to check on damaged structures, opened the door cautiously. The bear immediately moved forward, but paused on the threshold, looking back once more. Not at Thomas this time, but at baby Lily, who was playing contentedly with other village children near the fire. "Bear go?" Lily asked, her small face suddenly serious. The bear made her familiar chuffing sound, then slipped out into the brilliant morning. Several villagers, including Thomas, followed her outside, curious about her sudden departure. They watched as the massive creature lumbered through the deep snow, heading not toward the forest as expected, but toward the village's northern edge, where the path led up into the mountains. She paused once, looking back as if to ensure they were following, then continued with determined strides. "She wants us to follow her," Connor said, already pulling on his heavy boots. "But why?" Sarah had joined them, Lily bundled warmly in her arms. The answer came in the form of voices carried on the crystal-clear air, strangers approaching from the mountain trail. The bear had heard them coming long before human ears could detect their presence. 6 men appeared around the bend, struggling through the deep snow with packs and what looked suspiciously like trapping equipment. They came to an abrupt halt at the sight of the villagers, and froze completely when they noticed the enormous bear standing among them like a guardian. "What in God's name?" one of the strangers breathed, his hand instinctively moving toward the rifle slung across his back. "I wouldn't," Logan Carter said quietly, stepping forward. "That bear is under the protection of Pinewood Village." The leader of the group, a tall man with cold eyes, recovered his composure quickly. "We're simply travelers caught in the storm," he said smoothly, looking for shelter before continuing our journey. But the bear was not fooled. She advanced several paces, her massive body radiating unmistakable threat. The strangers backed away, their pretense of innocence falling away. "What kind of devil's magic is this?" one of them demanded, looking from the bear to the villagers with fear and suspicion. "Controlling wild beasts like familiars?" "No magic," Thomas replied calmly. "Just understanding. That bear saved my daughter's life last night, and many of us months ago. She's earned our respect and protection." Silas Reed's expression darkened. "Bears belong in cages or on rugs, not playing nursemaid to human children," he spat, There are people who would pay good money to see such an oddity, or to hunt it. The threat hung in the air like frost. The mother bear growled, a deep rumble that vibrated in the chests of all who heard it. Ethan Marshall stepped forward, his years of wisdom evident in his steady gaze. "You came hunting something you don't understand," he said to the strangers. "I suggest you leave before you find more than you bargained for." For a tense moment, it seemed the confrontation might escalate to violence. The hunters outnumbered the villagers currently present, and they were armed. But then a sound broke the standoff, the high, clear voice of a child. "Bear, protect," Lily said from her mother's arms, pointing at the mother bear with absolute confidence. "Bear, family." The simple declaration hung in the air between the two groups. The mother bear turned at the sound of Lily's voice, her aggressive stance softening visibly. Something in that moment, the bond between child and beast so clearly displayed, seemed to penetrate even Silas Reed's hardened heart. He looked from the bear to the baby and back again, his expression troubled. "What is this place?" he asked finally, a note of genuine bewilderment in his voice. "A place where old boundaries are being redrawn," Connor answered simply. "Where we're learning there are better ways to live alongside the wild than fearing or conquering it." By now, more villagers had noticed the commotion and were gathering, including Jacob and Avery. The hunters found themselves increasingly outnumbered, and considerably unnerved by the sight of a community so apparently at ease in the presence of a creature they had been taught to fear. "You won't find what you're looking for here," Logan told them firmly, "but you're welcome to rest and resupply before moving on, as long as you leave your traps and hunting gear behind." After a hushed conference among themselves, the hunters reluctantly agreed. Under the watchful eyes of both the villagers and the mother bear, they surrendered their trapping equipment and were escorted to the meeting hall for a meal before continuing their journey. As they departed later that day, Silas Reed paused at the village boundary, looking back at Thomas, who had overseen their departure. "I've been hunting all my life," he said, his certainty shaken. "Thought I understood the natural order of things. But what I've seen here today—" He shook his head, unable to finish the thought. "Perhaps the natural order is more complex than any of us realized," Thomas suggested. Reed nodded slowly. "Perhaps." He hesitated, then added, "There are others who will come looking for your bears when they hear the stories. Not all will be as easily persuaded as we were." "We know," Thomas replied simply. "We'll be ready." After the hunters departed, the mother bear remained with the village for several more days, seemingly reluctant to return to hibernation while potential threats lurked nearby. She took to patrolling the perimeter of the settlement each morning and evening, a massive guardian that no predator, human or animal, would lightly challenge. During this time, the villagers set about repairing the damage from the storm. The Morgans' cottage was beyond salvation, but in true community spirit, everyone pitched in to build them a new home. Michael Hayes led the construction, incorporating design elements that would make the new dwelling stronger than the old. Throughout the building process, the mother bear was a constant presence, sometimes watching from a distance, sometimes approaching to inspect the work with what almost seemed like critical interest. The builders quickly grew accustomed to her presence, some even taking to explaining what they were doing as if she could understand the finer points of carpentry. "Never thought I'd be building a house with a bear, foreman," Connor joked one afternoon, as the massive creature examined a newly placed support beam with apparent approval. While the adults worked, the village children developed a cautious but friendly relationship with their unusual guardian. Under strict supervision at first, then with growing confidence, they would approach the bear with offerings of honey or berries preserved from the previous summer. The bear accepted these gifts with gentle delicacy, careful never to frighten the little ones with sudden movements. Lily, however, required no supervision. The bond between her and the bear transcended normal boundaries. She would toddle fearlessly up to the enormous creature, chattering in her limited vocabulary, sometimes even climbing onto the bear's back when she lay in the snow. The mother bear tolerated these liberties with remarkable patience, treating the human child almost as she would her own cub. "It's as if she's adopted her," Sarah remarked to Avery one afternoon as they watched Lily sleeping peacefully against the bear's massive side, her tiny hand curled in the thick fur. "Or perhaps they've adopted each other," Avery replied thoughtfully. "Lily reaches out to her in a way none of us can, and the bear responds to that innocence." The new cottage was completed in record time, sturdier and somewhat larger than the original.